Welcome back to the Snowpoint Cast. Today we're going to be interviewing Masters TCG champion from 2011, David Cohen. Welcome to the show, man. How you been?
Good. Thanks for having me. It's, we're living in a crazy time right now, but, it's good that we can have time to do this sort of stuff, like drum up the past and think about all the good memories of when I was, good at something.
Bring back emo David. I miss emo David.
Many people do.
Yeah,
Even
true.
my new coworkers, when, once they inevitably stumble across old Facebook pictures, they're like, well, you gotta come in like this.
That is a lot of eyeliner. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Meg Devore. Meg Devore's the deck you won with in 2011. So when it came out, when the concept of the deck came out for Nats, a lot of people knew that it was obviously a good combo. Magnezone and Embor had a lot of synergy, obviously, but it wasn't very consistent until you put twins in the deck. So how did you come across this idea of twins, and why did you choose Meg Devore after you figured out twins?
So, trying to go back to that format. So we had the mid-season rotation. So Nats was basically the first event of that rotation for people who are new to the game. So it was a brand new format. And I did not go to Nationals that year. So I had been testing all kinds of decks, and there wasn't a huge variety. And so what the format ended up being is basically, it was just Reshiram Typhlosion, and then the Yanmega deck, and that was it. And then the couple fringe decks, there was the Dawn Fan thing with a bunch of stage ones, and a little bit of Magnivore. But what came out of Nationals, I remember, was basically a solidified metagame of Reshiram and Yanmega, and I believe the general consensus was if you played it right, Reshiram was just the best deck. It could beat Yanmega, Magnezone, and so there was no reason to really play the other decks. A lot of people did think that with their own play style, they could manage to beat the Reshirams. But piloted by an expert, Reshiram was far and away the best, and so people started to latch on to that. But I remember that I had been testing all these different decks. I knew I didn't want to play one of the two. It just didn't feel good. My wheelhouse is not playing a very meta deck and then trying to subtly outplay players, because I'm not that good. And I did not believe I was that good, so I needed more of a for sure method to win games.
Right.
And what that ended up being was actually, I believe, just a week before Worlds or so. It was very short term. Is starting to test Magnivore more and realizing oh shit, there's a way that it can almost 100% of the time beat a Reshiram deck. And so Twins was something. I don't even remember if I had been testing with Twins or if just someone told me about it very shortly before the actual event.
Wow.
But I believe that the whole deck kind of came together very quickly, short term, before Worlds. But it for sure could beat Reshiram in almost every game. Could go by this exact same flow. And then it would struggle against Yanmega and the other decks, but I was banking on the metagame being mostly Reshiram as people started to realize, this is basically the best deck. Did
Reshiram win Nats that year, or did it do well at Nats that year?
I don't actually remember.
I don't actually remember either, to be honest.
I'll have to look it up, but I know that the general consensus coming out was that it was the better deck, at least towards Worlds, as people started to test more. Because whatever won Nationals, regardless if it was that or not, people started to look at the metagame and realize, as we play with this format a little more, got another month under the belt, Reshiram is the best deck.
Right.
Because if you play it properly, it could beat all those other things.
Yeah, definitely a really strong archetype. I feel like any deck that accelerates energy from the discard has always been pretty notably good. So having that as a meta deck and knowing that that's the meta going in is, I mean, it's a pretty hard read on the meta, to be honest, because losing to Yan Mega Zone is also one of the best decks. So that's kind of like a suspect read, but I mean, apparently it worked out for you.
Yep.
Okay, so did you have, like, in your run, did you have any, like, really dicey games? Like, were there any games where you're like, wow, if I missed an attacher, I, like, would in a one world?
Totally, and I fully believe I had a lot. I mean, you have to get lucky to win worlds, but
Obviously.
I had a lot of luck in the sense that I went in knowing that I would struggle against Yan Mega. Very first round of the day, I played the one of the best Japanese players, Yamato, and he was playing the Don Fan
the champion from 04.
Yep, he's a really good guy, and both character and play. So I barely came away from that game. At the very end, close match, like with just one single card and one turn at the very end of a 3-game set. And so, or actually no, back then it was just singles during Swiss play.
Yep.
So it was just a long ass game. But after that, it was almost entirely Reshiram's. And so I was able to play just Reshiram, and then I only ended up playing one other Yan Mega deck, I believe, the entire day.
It's nice when you hit the matchups that you read. Like, that's so good that you hit a bunch of Reshirams. Why is that matchup so positive for Embor?
Yeah, so the basic strategy was you'd go down in one prize, and then you could use twins to basically immediately set up from there wherever you were. Ideally, you were already set up, but the trade-off after that was that you could trade your Reshirams for theirs without the use of plus power, because they needed a plus power to kill your Reshirams.
Right.
But because they were using Typhlosion, they would always have a damage counter on theirs. So you could basically just trade 1 for 1 for the next 4 prizes, and at the very end, you immediately lay down the Rayquaza Deoxys Legend.
And they just win.
And you could one-shot anything on their field and get 2 prizes with that. So it was always it was designed to come down to the last prize. It was a trade-off.
Right. And I think when you play twins in a deck, you kind of have to, like, that's something that a lot of, like, more experienced TCG players do, is they see a game and they're like, okay, I'm down on prizes, but I know what I have to do to find my win condition. And especially when you have twins is one of those cards where it's like, I know I'm going to go down on prizes, but I get to search 2 cards. So what's really worse?
Yeah, and the Reshiram deck at the time was a very predictable playstyle. They didn't have the kind of options that a lot of decks have in other formats, and that was part of the strength of my game in that format, was the fact that you could predict other gameplays so easily because there was such a limited card pool. So you knew that they could only one-shot one of your support guys with the use of multiple plus power, and that would then restrict their ability to continue to trade with your Reshirams. So they really didn't have a lot of good options besides just engaging in the immediate trade.
Yeah, they're pretty linear as a deck. Okay, so let's talk about finals. So obviously you didn't know about the truth going into the event, but you played it in the finals, and I remember we talked about this like a while ago at a regionals, and you said that it was like the matchup is good for you, just because, you know, with the way the truth is, it's a deck that banks on the fact that you're not going to be able to one-shot it, and Meg Devore can just one-shot anything. But you did say that you had like some close games with Ross. Can you dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, so you're exactly right. The truth was also like Magnabor. It was a counter to Yan Mega and Reshiram, knowing that they did not have the ability to do giant damage at once. And so my deck was basically the only thing that could possibly beat the truth. But it was just such a good deck that, I mean, in order to get enough KOs and take enough prize cards, you have to burn through almost all the energy in your deck. And it really did depend on setup. So the game 1, I remember I won pretty easily, but it took the whole time. But it was just a matter of like, if I could get set up first and then make the trades that were important, because I'd have to sacrifice 4 of my energy to the Lost Zone in order to knock out some of the big dudes, and with just such a limited amount. But that combined with Rayquaza Deoxys' ability to take multiple prize cards while one-shotting something, it was very much in Magnabor's favor as long as things went smoothly. And so game 2, it did not go smoothly.
As Pokemon does sometimes.
Yep. And so I remember that I just kind of took that one slowly to try to burn time, because I knew so game 1 I was able to get set up before he got like his full lock in place,
right,
before he got like Vileplume down and stuff. And so game 2, the fact that he was able to choose going first and then immediately get Vileplume that next turn, that definitely kind of almost seals the fate, because that locks out most of my evolutions. I think that was the problem, was I only have one stage 1 of each line, and so if getting Vileplume down before I can spam rare candies does actually almost guarantee the truth to win. So game 1 I went first and was able to get them all down, and I think it even took him a couple turns to get Vileplume up, which basically let me get entirely set up. But it is very much a setup determined matchup. But I do have the advantage of being a deck that his truth is not designed to counter, and so it does have options.
Nobody really knew about Magnabor going into the event, because Twins is such a vital part of the deck, and like everybody was playing the deck, or they were testing the deck without Twins, because for whatever reason they just didn't play Twins.
Yep, I know for sure Twins was something I got from one of the members of X-Files. Some of because the community here in Washington is so good and had so many good players back then, it was definitely something that I know for sure I didn't think of on my own, but it was part of the eventual discovered kind of style that Magnabor had to be played in order to have that advantage.
So did you talk a lot with Team X-Files in terms of like decks and stuff? I didn't know that you were associated with them at all.
Just because so many members were locals around here, we're all kind of buddies, and I was never as privy to their lists and stuff as like I would never see Ross. He lived across the country, so his kinds of ideas were definitely unknown to me. But just by nature of being pals and testing with a lot of really good players, you naturally kind of glean information from them. They share ideas, and like you test decks together, so you see kind of what stuff they're doing, and you're like, oh yeah, that is a good idea. Like, let's take some of that.
Interesting. So speaking of gleaning information, there's a story that I heard from someone else about 2009 Worlds, and it's about, so you got second in seniors in 2009, right? And the story that I heard was actually about Ross as well. So it's funny that we're talking about Ross as well now. But could you just tell that story of like how you came across the deck that you played to get second that year?
Yeah. So I have no recollection of what I had been planning on playing in Worlds that year. That was my very first year that I'd made it into the World Championships. So I for sure wasn't confident in anything. And I remember me and my buddy Zane Nelson were going.
He's a homie. I love Zane.
Around the hotel, and we saw some members of X-Files testing this deck on the floor, and we were just going over because we knew some of them, so we're like, oh, let's go over and hang out and see what kind of stuff they're doing. And they were playing, like one of them was testing this Flygon deck, and I don't really remember which parts of it we saw, but I know for sure we saw the idea of like, okay, I see a Flygon and I see a Memory Berry, and so can conclude the other bits from there.
Right.
What I don't remember, I was trying to look up the list before this, but I know the ones that they played had something different than my list. I have my list in front of me. They had some kind of tech that we did not think of.
Did you play Palkia?
Like, oh, did I play what?
You play Palkia?
Yeah, so we had Palkia, we had Mewtwo, we had Nidoqueen to heal your guys, and then those were the techs. And so I think they had something else, but I'm not positive what it was. But we were basically able to just watch like half of this game, see like, oh man, this is actually a really good idea. Then we went back to the hotel room and crafted this list and started just playing it briefly, and realized Oh man, this is really good. Oh, I remember the difference. Okay, so the difference was we decided to put in 4 copies of PokéDryer, which was kind of viewed as a very luck-based card and not super reliable.
Right.
Because you had to have the 2 copies in your hand, and then you could get any 2 cards that you wanted.
Right.
But when it hit, it allowed you to speed up the deck.
Busted card when it hits. Really good card when it hits.
And so I remember they did not have that, and so that was one of the main differences. Was their deck was arguably more consistent and smarter built, but we had luck on our side.
And Masters do tend to do that with Decklist. They do tend to make them a little bit better than the seniors, for sure.
Yeah.
So did you even know that Ross, he didn't even play that deck that year? So first off, okay, I'm going to say he got a quote unquote worse result than you. He got top 16 in Masters, but it's tough to compare Masters to seniors. But you got second in seniors. He didn't even play the deck that you saw him playing. Did you know that?
Yep. Yeah, I remember they had something else, because I think
they played Pelkiolok.
Finicky. Yeah.
Yeah, that's funny.
That's right.
Yeah, funny story. Okay, so I told you some of the questions before, but this is kind of a surprise question I'm going to hit you with. So I don't know if you remember this, but way back when they had like regionals where it was like you play Swiss rounds in standard and then they would switch to top 8 expanded. They did that. They had that for like 9 months, I think. It was a really weird format, and I don't know why they did it. It was kind of bad. But one of the like iconic moments that I like remember from you from the past was, so there was a Vancouver regionals that you top 8'd, and it was that same tournament that it was like, okay, so you play in standard and then you switch to expanded for top 8, and people didn't test expanded at all, so they kind of just played whatever. Sometimes they played VG because it was just really consistent, and then sometimes they played just like Pyro to counter VG, and that's what happened in that regional. So people just like were playing VG, and then they were also playing Pyro, and I remember you were discussing like what deck you should play, and you were like, Empoleon is really good. Does anyone have the cards for Empoleon, like Empoleon Dusknoir with Miltank? And I like was trying to find these cards for you, and then we ended up not being able to find the cards. You played VG and got destroyed by Pyro. But I remember looking at that top 8, and there was like 5 Pyro decks and 2 VGs and like 1 Dark. So you would have had like plus matchups against 7 out of 8 decks. Have you ever, other than obviously Worlds 2011, have you ever had an event where you're like, oh, like I have a really good read on the meta, but like I'm not going to play that deck? And then you play the event and then you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I didn't play that deck.
That was the most like obvious one.
Yeah.
And that one definitely, I was very upset with that, because I even knew
there's so many Pyros and that matchup's literally free.
Yeah. And I just didn't have the cards. So yeah, I was not a fan of that style of switching formats.
Yeah.
I honestly don't think I've ever had the best read on the metagame going into a tournament, so I don't think that's usually happened to me. I think the only times I've had good reads on it is when I was at Worlds and able to utilize that to either get second or win. I really, every other tournament I go into, I honestly, sometimes I'll assume something and then it's just totally different. But I don't think I've ever assumed and then done something else and then have been correct about the original.
Other than 2011.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's pretty much all the questions that I have for you, but I got one more, and I ask everyone that comes on the show. So if you were to give a piece of advice for those who are looking to become better at the Pokemon trading card game, what would you tell a player that's looking to improve? Yeah,
and the environment to improve skill has changed so incredibly much in the last decade. Back then, getting a good list was so important, but now we have the internet and everything's shared so much quicker. Like lists are even posted on the official Pokemon website, so the lists are not nearly as important as they used to. So I think what instead becomes important is being able to analyze game state. So what I would notice growing up almost through Pokemon, been playing it since I was like 11, all the way till occasionally now, but I noticed kids who would start at the same time as me and then kind of peak, and they would never get better, whereas I obviously was able to come world.
You got a dub at the world, so.
Yeah. So I have always kind of thought about what was the difference. And when I watch the gameplay of people who I think have stalled, I think it does come down to an ability to adapt. And so now that you have good lists, the next step is to be able to switch strategies kind of mid-game, so you can actually see what's happening. And then with that also comes the prerequisite that you are so in tune with the format that you know what possibilities your opponent can be doing, and that's part of being able to adapt to that gameplay. Is okay, they are likely to have X strategy with their deck and which text they have, and so you know that if you go a specific route, you have the highest likelihood of them not being able to respond or something like that. And then being able to know that if you're wrong, you can still kind of move gameplay. So it does kind of come down to just practicing over and over again, but not with the purpose of just testing the consistency of a deck or something, but actually practicing facing different scenarios and kind of memorizing what opponents are typically going to be doing in certain scenarios. And obviously this changes as the format changes, so it's a thing that's you always gotta constant upkeep. And so that's where I definitely, if I tried to go to a tournament now, I would do horrible because I don't have that background knowledge of what people might be doing when I see. I expect the top players to basically, your opponent flips over their basic and immediately they have kind of a tree in their brain of like, okay, if I see this card, I think they're going to go this direction or something like that. And I think that is something that is very much a learned trait, and not everyone starts doing basically or practicing.
Right. I think that's such an important part of being a good player too, is if you don't know what's in the meta, if you didn't know what cards existed and you were to play against the truth, I'm sure you would have had a much more difficult time figuring out what to do in the middle of a game, Yep.
Yeah. And with that then comes, just networking within the tournament. So I knew what was in the truth and what the strategy was, and basically every single card he had, because I was able to go around and talk to people, talk to his opponents, talk to our friends, etc. And that's also an understated technique, but that's definitely more for, kind of in a more advanced level of play, and it doesn't really involve practicing for that. That's just getting to know the community, and then being able to decipher things from people's retelling of gameplay.
Yeah, and we could honestly go on for an hour about how having homies in the community helps you become a better player, but we're not going to get into that today. Maybe another cast. All right, well, thanks so much for coming on. Do you have any shout-outs, or do you have a Twitter you want to link, or?
Oh, no, not for me. I'm not really too active on social media. I think shout-out is just to anyone listening, and to you for putting this on, because I think it's always, as history, time goes on in Pokemon, going back and looking at the history is so cool, because now that we have over a decade, almost 2 decades of really rich tournament history and things like that, I think a lot of people get a lot out of kind of revisiting those moments.
Right. I think it's really easy for stuff to fall to the wayside too. It's really easy to think, oh, Meg Devore was obviously good. Twins is broken. Duh.
Yep.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, but in the moment, it's hard to figure it out.
Awesome. Well, this has been the interview with David Cohen. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.